I'm a huge fan of the work that Paradox Interactive has done over the years. It's safe to say that I'd not be where I am without Cities Skylines, which they published, and I've had a lot of fun with games like Surviving Mars and Stellaris, and was even given the opportunity to be a part of the Stellaris YouTuber War as one of the cast of Season 2. Going back a couple of years, I absolutely adored their work with both Magicka and Magicka 2, and of course the Mount and Blade games. Whether they're just the publishers or are creating the games themselves via Paradox Development Studio, I've found a lot of fun to be had with their work. Now, I'm not telling you this for the sake of bragging rights or to try to appear as the biggest fan of theirs. This information is important, as I want you to be aware that I may very well have a bias towards Paradox, as I've both played their games for years and had one of their games quite literally change my life, as it's led to my job as a full-time YouTuber and streamer. You might have noticed in my list of games that I didn't mention all that many of Paradox's grand strategy games, which is what they'd arguably be most known for, with games like Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis being completely absent. That's because, up until recently, I'd barely touched any grand strategy games outside of Stellaris. I say up until recently because a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to fly to England for 2 days of gameplay with Imperator Rome, Paradox Development Studio's upcoming grand strategy game set, and I quote Wikipedia here, in the tumultuous centuries from Alexander's successor empires in the east to the foundation of the Roman Empire. During my time with the game, I heard a lot of talk from the other players, most of whom were far more experienced than I was, about how this game feels like it takes a lot of the best parts of Paradox's other grand strategy games and implements them into Imperator in a near seamless way. I think it may be obvious by now, but my goal with this video isn't to bring you an in-depth, experience-driven look at Imperator Rome, but rather to bring you my thoughts and feelings on the game as someone who is relatively inexperienced with this genre and is coming into the whole thing with a very fresh set of eyes. My first day with Imperator Rome was definitely dedicated to working out how the game works and what it's all about. The tutorial was actually a huge help and, honestly, where most of my time was spent. As Rome, you're given about 10 different objectives in the tutorial that the game suggests you go through in order, but you can complete them in any order that you choose. In my case, I decided to follow the suggestion, and the first few goals are actually fairly simple, teaching you how to build specific buildings inside of your cities, how to better build units for your armies, and how to merge them into one larger group, and of course, how to prepare for, engage in, and win a war against your neighbors, resulting in you taking their territory. Once you've been given the basics, the tutorial opens up with one of the later goals being to, quite simply, eliminate one of the neighboring factions, and that's it. The means through which you take them out are entirely up to you, and have mostly been taught to you by the goals that you've completed up to this point. As someone with no clue how to best play the game, I thought this was a fantastic way to learn. It wasn't a set of separate stages that you have to load into every single time. It wasn't pages of text to read through and understand, and it wasn't cutscenes to watch over and over again. It plays the same as starting up any other single-player campaign, only with the addition of the tutorial objectives. After a while, I decided it would be a good idea to check out some of the other factions in single player, so I spent about an hour playing as Carthage and an hour playing as one of the small Scottish factions. Carthage plays very similarly to Rome, albeit with a lot more land and resources from the beginning, a larger standing army, and some vassalized factions underneath their control. It definitely felt like a comfortable start, and one that would give me a strong chance of either surviving way into mid or maybe even late game. The Scottish faction I played as was a completely different experience to either Rome or Carthage, as it seems the further you go north from the Mediterranean Sea, the more tribal things become. The Scottish and the English factions seemed to love forming alliances with each other, and absolutely loved laying claim to my land. I found the best strategy to deal with this was pausing the game right at the beginning, doing everything I would need to do in terms of management, and then proceeding to declare war on my smallest neighbor. This wound up giving me a larger pool of resources and manpower in order to bolster my army, which I would need for when my remaining neighbors get a little bit fed up with me. I did manage to form a few alliances here and there with some of the factions in the north, but many of them would break the alliance as soon as I'd find myself in trouble, with some of them even turning against me and declaring war themselves. Honestly, this kind of makes sense given the density of the factions in an area as small as the British Isles. As day one of the Imperator Rome event came to a close, myself and the other players sat down to chat about the game, with the majority having nothing but great things to say after their 7-ish hours of play. The conversation generally took a turn towards nonsensical though, as we decided we'd be better having a competition to see if the YouTubers, journalists, or game developers could drink more. Day 2 kicked off in much the same way as day 1, only with a few more headaches and a few more glasses of water. The morning session was spent once again in single-player games, which this time I decided would be all about me trying to work out the best way to play as the same Scottish faction I'd played the previous day. As lunch came about, I'd come to the conclusion that while I was working out a bunch of new strategies and methods to succeed as my faction, this kind of gameplay would be better suited to more experienced players with the game or the genre, and is definitely something I'm going to be making a personal goal of mine once the game launches. As difficult as it could be at times, I thoroughly enjoyed the challenge. After lunch, we started up a multiplayer game, with myself and a couple of other guys deciding to play as a few of the Mediterranean factions, all allied, just to see if we could steamroll any and all opposition, which we certainly started to do. Sadly, the multiplayer was a little bit buggy and crashed after around an hour, but this is to be expected given that we are playing a very early version of the game and that there isn't even a release date at the moment. Multiplayer Game 2 saw myself and the same group of people take up residence in the British Isles as an alliance once again, with our goal this time being to take over the entire set of islands. This opened up some very different strategies, techniques, and gameplay when compared to my single-player runs with this Scottish faction. Suddenly, I was in a position where I didn't have to worry as much about my neighbors attacking or claiming my land, and instead we had a concentrated effort to take them out and to colonize Ireland. The AI factions certainly put up a respectable fight, but I can't remember any point at which I felt like we would lose the battle, as even when the AI would occupy parts of my territory or allied territory, there was always more friendly units available to fight back, either from my army or an allied army. As day 2 came to a close and I headed off to Bristol Airport, I started thinking about the future of this game and how excited I was to play more of it. I had fond memories of playing with the character menus, a system through which you can influence your leaders, governors, and family. A system through which you can recruit the 6-year-old son, the wife, and the brother of an enemy leader to your faction before assassinating said leader and declaring war on the successor. A system through which you can bribe, jail, execute, and exile anyone in a position of power to fit your needs or desires. There was so much great gameplay on display in the 2 days that I had with Imperator Rome, and a lot of laughs to be had in multiplayer. Outside of a few balance issues, I couldn't and can't think of anything that I could strongly criticize about the game, especially given that it's so far out from release that most of them could and likely will be fixed by launch. In conclusion, after 2 days with Imperator Rome, I felt fairly confident that I'd learned what I needed to know about the game in order to get a reasonable amount of success with it in single player and to get by fairly well in multiplayer. At least when not playing against the developers, who obviously have a fair amount more experience than I do. I honestly loved playing the game. I felt like I was developing storylines with my characters, and genuinely felt like there's a bit of roleplay potential in the whole thing because of it. When you get to make decisions like those available in Imperator, you feel a lot more involved and connected to the running of every aspect of your faction, including those decisions that are most likely better left off the record, like the time I took an enemy leader's toddler and exiled them because I could. I'm really excited to see where Imperator Rome goes and to see a release date get announced for the game. I've not really been super involved in any Paradox grand strategy games, but this one has convinced me that I need to be. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. A huge thank you to Paradox for giving me the opportunity to play Imperator Rome. It's an experience I'm certainly not going to forget for a long time, and I'm going to be looking forward to the release of the game next year. It has been my pleasure as always, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!